Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at medcomsnetworking.com. So information, resources, activities for people who work across the globe in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and so on. You'll find there's lots of information, lots of resources there. Particularly, you'll find over at NetworkPharma TV lots of videos. There's 600 odd videos now, so plenty of content to go and have a look at. Much of which has been generated from webinars like this. Also, a shout out to anyone who's interested in getting into medcoms. There's a resource at firstmedcomsjob.com where there's information about getting a job as a medical writer, as account manager, or whatever, and so on. So plenty to go and have a look at. I'm always here to answer questions if you need any help. Okay. Once again, we've got a nice international audience listening to a webinar. It's great, these webinars, we can get people from all over the world and all sorts of experts coming in and talking about topics of interest to medcom. So absolutely delighted to have the guys today, Kerry and Sally from Same But Different. We're going to go back, I'm referring as go back to basics because I've done so much AI stuff recently. This is about storytelling, which is at the bottom of everything that we do. So absolutely delighted to have you with us. We're going to have a presentation and Q&A. I'm going to hand over to Sally to kick us off. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone for joining us. So as Peter said, we're going to talk today about the power of raw and honest storytelling in medical communications. But firstly, just as a little introduction to myself and then Kerry. So I've got a multifaceted background as a scientist, lecturer, medcoms expert, so starting in cardiovascular and cancer research in the UK, US, and Australia. I've had my own lab for several years at the University of Manchester, but after a lot of grad writing and heartache, I decided to move into medcoms. So where I was for around 15 years, starting as a humble medical writer and then moving up through very senior scientific and managerial positions in medical affairs. And then I was very lucky to meet Kerry one rare disease day when we did something together, which was great. And I loved Same But Different and joined her last year to work on our commercial arm. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Kerry.
Thank you, Sally. So my background's in marketing and I was pretty much completely in marketing for a very long time. And then my son was born with a rare disease called Moebius syndrome back in 2007. And before then, I didn't really know much about rare diseases. I had experience of disability because I'd looked after somebody with Down syndrome when I was in my just graduated, and I loved marketing. It was something that I really, really enjoyed. But when Isaac was born and his condition causes facial difference, I realised that people were judging him based on the way he looked, even when he was a baby. And I wanted to do something to combine my passion for marketing and also my enjoyment and passion for photography. And it sort of clicked one day that actually what was really important was getting people to see the person behind the disability and the rare disease, rather than actually just seeing the condition. And that's why I started Same But Different back in 2015. I'd been really fortunate to do some photography for live music venues and events. I photographed Stereophonics, James, David Gray, a whole host of different people, and that brought its own challenges, but I absolutely loved it. And so then I thought, let's combine them both. And that's when I set up Same But Different. And hopefully we can share some of the things we've learned along the way of what works well, what makes things into an absolute nightmare, and why we do what we do, which we absolutely love. So I will share some of our slides and Sally can kick off what we're going to talk about today. But please do feel free to throw any questions into the web chat.
So as we said, we're going to talk about the power of raw, honest storytelling in medical communication. So storytelling, and particularly visual storytelling, is the heart of what we do at Same But Different. We're really using the arts for positive change. So around us, as Kerry mentioned, in rare disease, but also in disabled and disadvantaged groups in particular. The company has we're going to go, the main talk obviously is going to be about storytelling, but just very briefly, the company has two arms. We've got a community interest arm of the company, which Kerry's built up for a long time, and then the commercial arm, which we're sort of developing. You know, we're sort of working with healthcare professionals and patients and other individuals using, you'll see very sort of emotional and evocative photography and film and so forth. So we'll move on and start the conversation. So as Chloe said, do feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. So I'm going to sort of kick off with just a little bit about the roots and the psychology of storytelling and why it's so important in our communication. And then I'm going to hand over to Kerry after that to talk about our approach to storytelling with some great examples. So as you probably realise, storytelling has been a human activity really since the dawn of time, originally sort of through gestures and sounds to sort of express emotions and tell stories. It's very rich cultural traditions which are used to preserve history, morals and social norms, passing down wisdom, celebrating heroes, explaining the mysteries of the universe. I mean, a really great example, which I've used as the background for this slides, is the songlines in Australia, where they actually use songs to describe journeys. So we're able to navigate long distances through using these songs, which talked about various sort of points on the way, water holes, an old tree, in parts of the scenery that they passed so that they could navigate. And of course, you'll all be very familiar with bards that are part of our culture and many other cultures that would preserve our history through songs, roaming around the countryside, sharing those songs. But of course, over time, storytelling has really evolved from those ancient cave paintings and poems. Obviously, the invention of paper really transformed storytelling. It was initially created by the Han dynasty in China in 105 AD, because papyrus that was used by the Egyptians wasn't widely available. And they originally created paper for making records. That was really important, but it very quickly obviously was used to preserve all these stories, morals and history and so forth. So we're going to move So the other aspect of storytelling is it really activates a lot of the brain. So it's not just one part, it activates multiple parts of the brain, areas for language processing, emotions, and sensory experiences. And it's because of this multiple activation that it enhances learning and memory retention. Listening to stories actually activates what's called the mirror neurons, which help us empathise with the experiences of others. So, for example, if somebody's talking about motion in a story, it actually activates your motor cortex. So you're actually literally putting yourself in someone else's shoes and feeling the emotions as if they're your own. It's often used for memory and learning. So narratives can significantly improve memory recall, and it can be used as a way, if you wanted to, like the Aborigines, to remember a way or even a series of objects, you can make up your own little story to try and memorize that. Of course, in healthcare, storytelling is also really critical, starting with when you go to the doctors and you tell the story about what's happened to you. It gives a voice to that patient's experience, but also gives a more holistic view. So when you're talking to the doctor, he sees how it affects not only medical aspects, but also the psychological aspects, what's the impact on your life and so forth. And it gives details of patterns that can be quite critical for diagnosis, especially in rare diseases where there can be some very sort of subtle differences that might help somebody diagnose a particular rare disease. Storytelling has been shown to be really important therapeutically. It's both sharing the story and listening to stories of others with similar experience has been shown to help with emotional healing and coping with illnesses. It actually, through a number of scientific studies, has been shown to reduce anxiety, depression, and even pain. For example, a study in Vietnam in 2018 showed that a storytelling intervention actually reduced hypertension. It also alleviates burnout, increases job satisfaction of doctors and healthcare professionals and pharma clients and so forth, because it helps them connect with the the patients and the people that they are doing their job for. So this activation of mirror neurons that I mentioned before really helps with empathy and storytelling, and it bridges cultures, ages and backgrounds, creates these really strong shared human experiences, reducing isolation, offering comfort, hope and a sense of community. So it's connecting at a deeper level to the audience, and is really vital to communication in healthcare. So basically, so that's a little bit of background. I'm going to hand over to Kerry now, who's going to talk through our approach to storytelling with some great examples.
Thank you, Sally. So as I mentioned before, when I was looking at how to combine the arts and marketing and communications, I wanted to think, okay, how can I highlight the person behind the condition? So I started off very straightforward in a lot of ways, in that I used portrait photography to capture the portraits of children. And you know, I had no idea at that time whether it would capture the imagination of the people that we were trying to reach, or in fact, how the response would be. And we were overwhelmed with the amount of response. We reached 120 countries in just the first few months. We had people contacting us from around the world telling us that they connected with the imagery. This was one of the first ones that we took, which was of Percy. And as I said, we went for the straightforward sort of portrait style. But whilst we were doing that, we were also backing it up with the written narratives, where we were having interviews with the parents and creating the stories, and then created an online gallery. We wanted to make sure that rather than creating posters per se, we were creating artwork and things that could be used in different settings as art, so that we could reach a different audience. We found that obviously if you're involved in the rare disease or disability community and you have a child or you have a rare disease yourself, you get it. You know what's, you know, what life's like, you know the difficulties. So we needed to reach that wider market. And what we've tried to do with a lot of our work is to get past that barrier and try and find ways to engage. We found that if you were to show pictures of, say, a child looking really poorly, you get the, oh, that's sad, but then turn over. Whereas we wanted to encourage people to want to know more, and so have that connection. Also, what we found was that because the people within our team have lived experience, then we can ask those really difficult questions. We're not scared of saying, so, you know, how does it feel to have a child who's dying, or something like that? You know, these difficult questions, because we've lived through different experiences of rare diseases. We have people who have lost children. We have people who have, you know, gone through the parent experience, and then we have people who've got lived experience of having a rare disease as well. And we found that that was really important, so that you could actually not shy away from the difficult conversations, because that's really important. And again, the joy that's come through from the children that have actually taken part has been really important as well. And they're part of that journey of creating the projects that we work on. So we found that with the child focused imagery, which we still do today, but we found with that, it was almost an easy sell, if you like, because people want to engage with children. They want to know more about children. What was harder was where we were looking at adults and grown-ups, particularly involved as patients, and how we could get past that barrier, because sadly we lose our cutesy factor as we get older. So we tried to look at different projects that we could actually engage in. And one of our probably most complicated projects was rare beauty. I wanted people to have that curiosity factor, and we wanted people to want to know more, and especially with adults or young teens. So what we did was, with rare beauty, we wanted to inject, there's no pun intended there, but we wanted to inject beauty into a sterile environment. And in this case, we worked really closely with Birmingham Children's Hospital. It was an incredibly complex series of images we were going to create, because it involved so many different aspects. And firstly, it was in a working hospital. So, for example, with this scene, you have Tony Lander, who is the consultant surgeon. You have the scrub nurse, and you also have an undiagnosed patient called Olivia. when we turned up for the day, before then we had to work out who was going to be wearing what clothes, what we needed. We were having to coordinate with so many different departments and everything to make sure that we had the availability of the staff on the day as well as the locations. And we turned up on the day ready to go to the operating theatre because they'd set one aside for us. And then when we got there, excuse me, when we got there, we found out that they'd had an emergency that was unscheduled and that they'd had to use the operating theatre. So at that very last minute, there I was with the consultant, with the scrub nurse, with the nursing team, with the patient, their families, all raring to go, but then nowhere to actually take the photo that we'd planned. So we had to quickly think and ended up in pretty much a cupboard with a mobile light that we could use and set the scene. So we really had to think on our feet. But the whole purpose of this project was to make people to question and want to know more. And there's so many different bits to it. For example, we wanted the clinicians to be able to talk freely as well about how, in their case, rare diseases affect surgeons. So, for example, Tony was saying that when he operated with the families, it was really important that the family went on the journey with him and understood that when he operated on somebody with a rare disease, they didn't know how the body would react. So we were able to use this project to share different aspects from the clinicians, the patients, the families, and in a way that was engaging so that people wanted to know more. And as I said, there was that curiosity factor that was really important. When Olivia was talking about her condition and her mother was talking about the way that she helped look after Olivia, some of the things that came about were, for example, she was TPN, so she had everything, all of her nutrients, all of her liquids were through her heart, a port in her heart. And when she was explaining about the amount of time it took to take care of her, it was really good in highlighting not just the difficulties of a family with an unknown diagnosis, but also the complexity and the exhaustion that that family goes through. Because a mum would start at 5 in the morning, where she would have to sterilize everything. She would then measure the outputs, measure the inputs. Her temperature was taken throughout the day. Every time she was given any inputs, that had to be measured. And this would go on all day long until 1 a.m. And this went on constantly. So it highlighted lots of different things in this project, from the staff who highlighted what their work involved, what their difficulties were, how they connected with patients, all the way through to the patient experience. And each time we do these, we try and do the photographs, the stories, and try and build as much information as possible so that we can use it in lots of different ways. We've used these in grand rounds where we've talked to clinicians about the language of diagnosis. We've used them in art exhibitions to try and reach a wider audience to talk about rare diseases. It's all about trying to think about that longevity as well as that particular project and finding a way that it can stand out from all the other imagery and conversations and stories that are there in the media. We didn't just focus on images. It was also important to find ways of capturing the stories of patients. We often see that in conferences and things like that, that patients occasionally share their stories, and that's really, really important, but it's not always possible to do it at every conference or to share that breadth of knowledge. And we wanted a way to capture it that was almost carrying a theme throughout the different countries that are involved, the different people that are involved, and also, in this case, the sponsor, which was Illumina. So we started with a film called Journey of Hope. This was around language of diagnosis.
And on the 26th of May, it was the last day with that cry. Was the last day I felt like a mother. That day I became a researcher. That day I became everything else. I knew that I'm the only person who can try to help my daughter to find the answers and help her.
You feel like, I remember feeling, you know, that feeling when your legs, you can't feel your legs anymore, and you just think back and you feel like, sorry, your world is collapsing. And then you have lots and lots of questions that you want them to answer, and at the same time, you don't want to hear the answers.
He's the most outgoing person, friendliest person ever. And, you know, if that's a result of his condition, then that's an amazing part of it as well.
So for this film, it was really important that we captured, firstly, different experiences. So we travelled to Poland, to Holland, and also to Cambridge in the UK, and got these different experiences of people who all have the shared experience of having a rare disease and what that diagnostic journey was like. So we created from this the photographs that created the exhibition, the written narratives. We also created the short film, of which you've seen the promo, individual interviews with each of the parents, and also a longer short film, which was about 14 minutes long. And from that, we've won numerous awards and also been in many film festivals. It's been used in conferences, it's been used in exhibitions. So we try and maximize every opportunity so that we can use the stories and the experiences of people in lots of different ways so that they can be used in education, as well as trying to get the stories across to that audience who isn't necessarily aware of rare diseases and disability. Again, when we were talking about trying to reach different people, with the storytelling, when we've been doing the imagery, it's been really important to try and find that little factor that is getting people to want to engage. The beauty of rare, notice the theme of beauty in quite a lot of these. I think I need to come up with a different naming system. But with the beauty of rare, we again wanted to look at that idea of beauty, but in association with curious factors. So for this condition, we were looking at Huntington's syndrome as one of the conditions. And Jonathan is one of 3 siblings who had been diagnosed with juvenile Huntington's disease. And we wanted to get people to engage, to want to know more about the condition and how it affected them. A lot of the time when we think about these images and what we're going to be doing, we put so much time and effort into the tiny little details and those nuances that most people probably won't even see. But what we want is people to want to come back to these images again and maybe see in different details. So, for example, in this family, alcohol was very prevalent. He had an older brother who used alcohol a lot when he just got diagnosed, and unfortunately became an alcoholic quite quickly. There is the watch in his hand where it's just before midnight, the doomsday hour. There is the fruit and the vegetables, or rather the bread and the fruit in the bottom corner where it's going mouldy. There's the candle that's burning down. There's so many different details in the image that we wanted people to engage with, whether on a conscious level or an unconscious level, but mainly to find them to want to know more so that we can get them to read the stories, see the films, and also engage. And in this one, this is Lizzie. This is Jonathan's sister. She was only 16 actually when she was diagnosed, which was really unusual, but she already knew that she had symptoms because of her older brother. And we engaged with the family very closely when we were doing these images, not so much for them to tell us what they wanted to see in terms of the final images, because that wasn't necessarily their strength, but to engage with them to find out what the disease looked like, how it affected them, what was important to portray, and so that then we could craft the actual image around that. The family actually, the ones that suggested the dying flowers, because they wanted to show that there was Lizzie, who had been so full of life, as you can see in the photo on the table, and then here she was dying before their eyes. Sadly, she died only about a year after this photo. But what was really nice was that she had so much fun. By this time, she was immobile, she couldn't speak, there was very little that she was able to do, but to take part in this photo shoot was really, really important to her, but also to the family as well. We seem to have spent most of our time dealing with death and destruction, and one of the latest projects we've been working on is What Matters Most. And with that one, we've been dealing with end-of-life care. This one came about actually because of my own experience with my mother's end-of-life care. And to be blunt, it was an absolute nightmare. It was absolutely horrific. And I wanted to explore what was end-of-life care like for more people. I won't show the video because I think we're going to run out of time, but in this, we spoke to different people and tried to get their experiences of end-of-life care. We spoke to people who are terminally ill. We spoke to clinicians. We've spoken to a whole host of different people. And this has been a pilot of which we're hoping to expand the project. What was important was to get different experiences. I knew that from my experience had been horrendous, but it was important to see and to speak to different people to make sure that we had a full breadth and that it wasn't biased towards one particular story. And the reason I'm hovering on this is because what I wanted to do when I was talking to the partners in this project was to create a portrait, as well as the normal portraits of people. I wanted to create a portrait that captured that moment and the fact that that patient was center of all of what we did or what was happening in terms of end-of-life care. And when I tried to describe the portrait, I was using Rembrandt as a link. He did a portrait to do with dissection. And when I was trying to show this portrait and to the partners, who I don't think they'll mind me saying are not the most creative of people in this project, they were a little bit nervous, but I knew that it would work. I hope you think it worked. I knew that it would work, and I knew the way that I wanted it to happen. So what I did was created this image. So this image shows that there's Megan, who is terminally ill. She's 30 and she was given a terminal diagnosis 18 months ago and told that the life expectancy was 2 years. Around her in this image, you have at the right-hand side, she works in a hospice. Then you have the paramedic who talked to us about the fact that he often goes to cases where families are not really talking about the end-of-life care situation, which means planning isn't in place. We have the GP next, who talks about his connection with the patients and how important it is that he's there for them, not just for the person who's dying, but the family members as well. And then you have a palliative care Marie Curie healthcare assistant who was telling us that, you know, she connects with all of the patients that she dies, but she also is passionate about the job that she does and how important it is that people don't die alone. And one of the things that stood out for me was the fact that she told us that she knows every single lay-by in Anglesey because at some point or other she stopped there to cry after somebody's died. And then you have Dimitar, who is Megan's partner, who is there at every step of the way. And so we have all of these different stories that come together in this one image that combines the project. And again, it brings that curiosity factor into it so that people hopefully want to know more. And so whilst it's about somebody who's living with dying, it's really important that we try and capture something that can live on and that has a story that'll tell on its own way, but also that's backed with the images, the films, the written narratives. What we found was that we were getting huge amounts of coverage. We have wonderful relationships with a lot of different publications, but we also wanted to make sure that we could be in charge of the narrative. And so that's why we also set up Rarity Life magazine, which again gave us another platform to share our stories with. And in terms of contact details, you've got all our contact details on here, which, you know, please do feel free if you've got any questions about how we approach storytelling and what we found works for us. Just to give an example, What Matters Most was launched in January this year, at the end of January. And from that one project, we reached 91 million people through online coverage, 14.9 million people through social media. And then the exhibitions that we went to, which was only a few in January, February, March, was over 8,000 footfall. and then 42,000 people were emailed to this exhibition. So the reach that can happen from some of these projects when we use a creative approach is really, really, really high. And it's that longevity as well. Projects that we started off, as I started talking about Percy at the beginning of this. Percy we met 8 years ago, and only 2-3 weeks ago we met Percy again to do another photo shoot with him and to talk about how things had progressed. And we've kept that relationship with pretty much all the people that we've photographed over the years. And it's so important to show not just how things are at that moment in time, but also how things have progressed, so that it gives hope and that connection to people who are out there looking, you know, okay, so what does this mean for my child when it's a child with a diagnosis? So as I say, we try and be as much as possible looking at that creative aspect, and to try and make sure that people are involved at every stage of the storytelling, because at the end of the day, it's their story that we're telling. We're just trying to find a creative approach to do it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kerry. That was lovely. Okay, can we lose the slides and we'll go back to us talking? But thank you, that was very powerful. And you'll see some of the comments in the chat room and so on, and it just reinforces the fact that pictures can be very powerful.
Peter, so you froze a minute there, Peter.
Did I freeze? Oh, okay. Somebody tell me if I am, because I've had a little bit of a problem recently with that. So I was just saying that the pictures tell a powerful story, and you can see that in the comments coming through the chat. Can I ask a rather candid question? I'm not sure the right way to ask this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Okay, I think I know the answer. But when you're, as a principal, do you always, use real patients, real, carers, and all the rest of it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't we? In fact, one of the things that we've done with Rarity Life is the reason we set up Rarity Life, the magazine, was because we were tired of seeing tick boxes of inclusivity that actually was just a tick box. We wanted to show people that could be in beautiful fashion shoots, that could, lifestyle magazine that actually reflected the lifestyle of people, not just those that are disabled, but anyone. So yeah, we never mock up anyone. It's always real life.
Just what I assumed, and it's fascinating. I mean, you can look at these pictures and you can go, that's interesting, and you can start to get involved. But hearing your stories about the stories behind the pictures is absolutely fascinating. Have we got? I'm just wondering if there's anything that's coming in from the audience, but otherwise I'm going to carry on talking. I think some of what you touched on particularly early was the stories, and I'm sure you've got many of sort of working in hospitals and working with people to put this together. I suppose what I want to ask is, how challenging is it in practice, or do the patients all embrace this? But some of them must not, and I just wonder how challenging it is to get them on side, and the various support workers and so on. But do you find that straightforward?
We've been really fortunate that, we've worked in this for so many years now, and so we've got really good connections with rare disease organisations as well as people, individuals, and people have actually thrown themselves into it. An example with the hospital, that was really challenging because it's a working hospital. I can imagine. Yeah. And at one point, we were there trying to get a scene set up, and one of the nurses came in and she needed the bed, and for a tiny second I found myself saying, "It's our bed," and then realized, no, it's a hospital, it's your bed, take the bed, So yeah, it is challenging, especially when you are in environments that are very difficult. But we've spoken to so many people, I've spoken to people whose children have not long died, people whose children are dying, people who are dying themselves. And I think the fact that we've got that lived experience, that we're open and honest and able to ask those questions that sometimes people shy away from, means that you get that important conversation, and everybody is fully aware at every stage, and at any stage they can take their stories and say, I don't want to share these anymore. But that's only ever happened twice in the whole time we've done this, out of many people. And the reason for that was that their circumstances had changed. But for example, one of the people that we worked with wanted to share the story of her child who died. And she wanted to do that because her eldest son had died not long previously. and she felt that she couldn't hold the grief of both children at that same time, and she wanted to honor the daughter that had died as a baby. So there's different reasons for people sharing their stories, and we're privileged to be part of it.
I mean, yeah, just to add to that, I mean, it just sort of linked back to the psychology I was talking about as well. I mean, we see this in a practical level, that people actually, you know, really sort of enjoy sharing their stories, and it's actually healing for them. And some of the people that we've worked with have gone on from working with us to them being ambassadors in their area, whether it being a rare disease or whatever, that is beyond that.
Okay, I think I might have frozen there briefly again. And so keep nodding at me if you're hearing me, just because I need a bit of a reassurance there. Okay, right, sorry. No, absolutely. And I can understand entirely that patients want their voice heard. I can understand entirely that families and so on, and the people working with them all. So that's all. I can understand that it actually works out very well like that. I suppose I've got to ask the question. I think somebody else asked it in the chat, but what you haven't really said is how you're funding this. It's just an obvious question. How do these projects originate, and how do they get funded? Can you answer?
So in terms of funding, we work with industry. So, for example, Illumina, GSK, Roche. They're all organisations that we've worked with previously. And they've recognised the importance of storytelling, and raw and honest storytelling. What we don't do is ever put words into people's mouths. You know, it's not pre-decided scripted. It's not, you know, we're not telling people what to say. It's not a marketing project per se. What we do is we have funding from grant funding, but then also, as I say, it's the organisations that we work with as well as industry. So it comes from lots of different places. Where it's patient engagement, then quite often that's through industry sources, because at the end of the day, it's really important that the patient experience is shared, and also it helps to highlight the importance of the patient journey, especially if it comes to drug repurposing or something like that.
Yeah, just to add that additional flexibility with having the two arms of the business as well. As we mentioned before, we've got the community interest arm, so which is, you know, we get the grant funding and donations and so forth with that, whereas we've got the commercial arm, which is, you know, a lot of people who are here, if they're in MedComms, it's more like that sort of approach, you know, with a more closer contract with pharma and so forth. Although it can also be that more hands-off approach with them as well, in a more med-ed type fashion, but having those two approaches does give us a great deal of flexibility.
Understood. Do you generate your own ideas and go out and seek funding?
Oh, absolutely. That's my absolute favourite thing to do. Right. Unfortunately for the team, I keep coming back with, oh, I've had another idea.
More ideas.
I mean, because we live, eat and breathe in this industry, you know, we come across so many issues that we want to highlight as well. So sometimes we'll generate issues and ideas ourselves, and sometimes working with partner organisations.
Understood. I mean, again, just thinking back on it, I mean, you've said it, let's not go back on it, but let's think about it. The numbers you were talking about in terms of the reach were quite extraordinary, actually.
We've had huge reach. The what matters most was the most recent project. The project before that, so for example, Journey of Hope, I think we reached 36 million in the first week of that. We reached I think it was 26 million with You're Not Alone. We worked with Soft UK and Illumina to highlight the story of trisomy 13 and 18. What we wanted to do was look at how the impact of those diagnoses and what it meant on the families. And what we did through there was the films, the photography, the written narratives, and it highlighted a number of different things. For example, the language that was used by clinicians, where they were saying that children weren't incompatible with life when they were born with those conditions. And we were able to use those not just through press articles, but also to highlight to medical professionals that actually the language they use is really important. So there's so many different ways that we try to use our projects, our exhibitions, so that, as I said before, that they've got longevity, but can be used in lots of different ways as well. But the absolute most important thing when it comes to the storytelling from our perspective is that it's raw and it's honest. And the creative side of that is something that, you know, we enjoy doing, but also it needs to stay true to the people who we're actually reflecting and trying to show their stories of.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that,
sorry,
I see the approach is quite different to, you know, having been in MedComms for 15 years, everyone's always so worried about compliance that they're you know, very careful in their scripting things. They're having, you know, very sort of rigid questions for the person they're interviewing. Our approach isn't like that at all, and I've seen the difference it makes by having a much more sort of fluid approach and allowing the people to speak and tell their story and get those insights that. So if you don't know about an insight, you're not going to have the question for that insight, are you? So by allowing people to speak, we get additional insights that you wouldn't get, and also just that emotional connection in the stories. You know, when you read our stories, I just feel that they do connect with people, that you can relate to them.
Yeah, I'd agree with Sally on that one. I think quite
Mhm.
often we're asked from people, you know, can you share your questions with us in advance? And it's like, no, because I can't share what our conversation is going to be because I don't know what our conversation is going to be. You know, with the You're Not Alone, where we were talking about trisomy 13 and 18, I had no idea that the issue around that was very much around the use of incompatible with life as a words. And had we had a very closely scripted conversation, it would never have gone in that direction. The same with What Matters Most. One of the things that came out in that project was the problems with rurality. And again, the conversations that were led by the people we're talking to sometimes goes in quite, you know, strange directions, but they're directions that give us a breadth of having material that also allows us to create other projects and identify other issues that might be around. So somebody was asking before about how we come up with project ideas. It's from living, eating and breathing this world that we live in, but also it's from the people that we're talking to. And we very much involve people at different stages and at the earliest stage possible.
Yeah, and I mean,
Okay,
just
can we
going back to the compliance thing. So I was just going to say, you can edit things at the end anyway, so it doesn't have to be pre-defined. You can, you know, sort that out afterwards.
I mean, I was thinking that, I think I was thinking the same thing as you're touching on. I mean, you know, what you're doing there is gathering an amazing amount of insight into patient lives and so on. If I'm a traditional medcoms agency, I can then take that and go, okay, now I understand more about it. Therefore, I can put something together that's maybe more structured or something with an approval or something like that. But it's absolutely fascinating to get those discussions. I'm absolutely sure. Can we just pick up on Mitchell's question? I think, you know, can you speak to more measurable impact beyond the numbers? I mean, which are incredible. Can you speak a little bit about the measurable impact on patients, families, carers, doctors, nurses? Is question. So,
for example, you know, when you're talking about measurable impact with What Matters Most, one of the people that we spoke to is actually the chair of the BMA, Phil, whose mother was dying. And in fact, she was the first person that I filmed when we started the project. And I was really nervous about filming her because she was a similar sort of age to my mother who died. So when she agreed that we could interview her, which was incredible in itself because it was only a few days before she died, they had those conversations in front of us where she told him that she was proud of him, where he was able to tell her how proud he was of her. They had that conversation that may not have happened if we hadn't facilitated it in this project.
Those problems. Let's draw a line there on what was a powerful story at the end there, you know, encourage, as I always do, encourage people to reach out to you. LinkedIn is an easy way of doing it, but please, I mean, that part of the point of these exercises is for you all to talk to each other and make connections. So I'm going to draw a line there for the recording. If you're listening to this, don't run away because we'll carry on going for a few minutes. But it's a huge thanks to Kerry and Sally. It's fascinating and lovely to hear the stories that you've been sharing. So thank you for that. Thank you everyone for joining in. If you want to know what I'm doing, medcomsnetworking.com, but I'm going to draw the recording to a finish there. So take care, everybody. Take care. Bye.